3:17 a.m., Baltimore. The scream tore through the apartment complex. Terrence Johnson collapsed on his bathroom floor, staring in horror at his groin. Black tissue. Maggots squirming through decaying flesh. 6 hours ago, he'd been inside a 500-pound woman named Elfreda. Now, something was inside him. How does desire transform into destruction? What unseen dangers lurk in the most intimate moments of connection? If you haven't joined the Guilty Whispers community yet, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell to become part of our growing family of true crime enthusiasts. Share your location in the comments below. We love seeing how our stories connect people across the world. The first responders arrived at Parkview Apartments just before 3:30 a.m., responding to what dispatch had coded as a possible medical emergency. The night was unusually warm for Baltimore in late September, the kind of lingering summer heat that made the air feel thick and oppressive. Officer Daryl Washington was first on the scene, followed minutes later by EMTs Jasmine Torres and Marcus Delaney. The call had been strange, a man screaming about bugs eating him alive, but in their years of service in Baltimore City, they'd learned that nighttime calls often veered into the bizarre. When they knocked on the door of apartment 312, they were met with weak cries for help. The building manager, a heavy-set man named Gerald Tucker who had clearly been roused from sleep, fumbled with his master key ring, his hands shaking slightly as he unlocked the door. "I heard him screaming earlier," Tucker explained, his voice low. "Thought maybe he was having a bad dream or something. Then it got quiet. When you all called, I figured I should check on him, but I didn't want to go in there alone." EMT Jasmine Torres nodded reassuringly as she and her partner Marcus entered the dimly lit apartment, calling out as they stepped inside. "Baltimore Emergency Services. Hello? Is anyone there?" The smell hit them first, a putrid odor that assaulted their senses and made Torres instinctively cover her nose and mouth. In her 8 years as an EMT, she'd encountered many disturbing odors: the sickly sweet smell of decomposition, the sharp tang of fresh blood, the acrid scent of burned flesh. But this was different. It was the unmistakable scent of active decay, but coming from what they knew had to be a living person based on the continued moans emanating from the bathroom. "In here," a weak voice called out. "Please, help me." The bathroom door was partially open, a sliver of harsh fluorescent light spilling into the darkened hallway. Torres pushed the door wider, her gloved hand already reaching for her penlight. What she saw made her freeze momentarily, her professional demeanor briefly cracking before years of training reasserted itself. Terrence Johnson, a muscular black man in his late 30s, was sprawled across the cold tile floor, naked from the waist down. His upper body was clothed in a sweat-soaked white t-shirt that clung to his torso. Between his legs, he clutched a blood-soaked towel, his knuckles white from the force of his grip. His skin was ashen beneath its natural deep brown tone, covered in a sheen of sweat that reflected the harsh bathroom lighting. His eyes were wide with terror and pain, darting between the EMTs as they entered, silently pleading for help. "Sir, I'm Jasmine and this is Marcus. We're here to help you. Can you tell me what happened?" Torres knelt beside him, pulling on a fresh pair of nitrile gloves from her kit. The smell was stronger here, reminiscent of gangrenous tissue, but with an unusual musky undertone she couldn't quite identify. When Terrence slowly moved the towel, both EMTs instinctively recoiled. What they saw defied explanation. The man's genitals were in an active state of decomposition, blackened tissue, weeping fluids, and most disturbing of all, small white larvae visibly moving within the wounds. The surrounding skin showed spreading discoloration, angry red lines radiating outward, signaling that whatever this was, it was aggressively moving into healthy tissue. "Jesus Christ," Marcus whispered, immediately reaching for their radio while Torres began taking Terrence's vitals. "Dispatch, this is Unit 17. We're going to need an emergency transport to Johns Hopkins, Priority 1. Patient presenting with severe necrotizing infection of the genital region with visible infestation. Temperature 103.8. Heart rate 120. BP 90/60 and falling. We need an infectious disease specialist on standby. As they worked to stabilize Terence for transport, Torres tried to get more information, her voice steady despite the disturbing scene before her. Sir, when did this start? Have you taken any medications or drugs recently? Any allergies we should know about? She placed an oxygen mask over his face as Marcus established an 4-line for fluids. Through gasps of pain, Terence managed to respond, his words slightly slurred. Last night, a woman. Alfreda. Met her online. After we had sex, I felt strange. Like burning. Woke up a few hours later with pain, worse burning. Then I saw, oh God, I saw this. His voice cracked, tears streaming down his face. Any history of immune disorders? Diabetes? Recent surgeries or injuries? Torres continued, systematically running through her assessment questions while her partner prepared a sterile covering for the affected area. Terence shook his head weakly. Nothing. I'm healthy. Work construction. Never been sick like this. And this woman, Alfreda, did she appear sick? Any visible infections or lesions? No, Terence whispered. She looked fine. Normal. Just, big. 500 pounds at least. Did you use protection? Marcus asked as he carefully placed sterile gauze around the infected area, trying not to disturb the visible larvae while containing the weeping fluids. Terence's silence was answer enough. The ride to Johns Hopkins Hospital was a race against time, the ambulance cutting through the nearly empty streets of pre-dawn Baltimore with lights flashing and sirens wailing. Inside, Terence's condition deteriorated rapidly, his blood pressure continuing to drop as his body fought the aggressive infection. By the time they wheeled him into the emergency department, he was slipping in and out of consciousness, his skin clammy and gray, his breathing labored despite the oxygen mask. Dr. Daniel Chen, the attending emergency physician, took one look at Terence's condition and immediately called for infectious disease and surgical consults. At 43, Chen had worked in Baltimore's emergency rooms for over 15 years, but the sight of the actively necrotizing tissue with visible larvae made even his experienced stomach turn. Get him to Trauma Bay 1 and start broad-spectrum antibiotics now, Dr. Chen ordered, his voice calm but urgent. I want 2 large-bore IVs, fluid resuscitation, and prep for emergency debridement. And someone get Dr. Wilkins down here immediately. The emergency department erupted into controlled chaos as nurses and technicians moved with practiced efficiency. Blood samples were drawn and rushed to the lab. Monitors were attached, displaying Terence's increasingly unstable vital signs. An X-ray technician arrived with a portable machine to check for gas in the tissues, a common sign of necrotizing fasciitis. Dr. Maya Wilkins, the hospital's leading infectious disease specialist, arrived within minutes, her white coat thrown hastily over scrubs, suggesting she'd been called from another procedure. At 36, she was relatively young for her position, but her expertise in rare and aggressive infections had earned her both respect and authority at Johns Hopkins. Her expression remained professionally neutral as she examined Terence, but her eyes betrayed her shock at what she was seeing. After her initial assessment, she stepped away from the bedside, gesturing for Dr. Chen to join her. This isn't a typical necrotizing fasciitis, she said, her voice low as she spoke to Dr. Chen, both of them watching as nurses continued emergency treatment. The progression is too rapid, and I've never seen larval activity this advanced in such a short time frame. The tissue degradation pattern is unusual too, it's almost like accelerated post-mortem decomposition, but in living tissue. Whatever this is, it's not naturally occurring. Bioterrorism? Chen asked, the word barely audible. Wilkins shook her head slightly. Too targeted, too specific. This is personal. And the larvae, they appear to be Californidae, common blowflies. They don't typically infest living tissue unless there's already significant necrosis present. They've been deliberately introduced. Jesus, Chen muttered. I'll call security. They need to contact Baltimore PD. This is beyond medical, it's criminal. As the medical team worked to save Terrence's life, hospital security initiated their protocol for suspected criminal activity. The nature of the injury suggested possible intentional harm, elevating this from a medical case to a potential criminal investigation. By 4:15 a.m., a call had been placed to the Baltimore Police Department's Violent Crimes Division. Detective Andre Powell arrived at Johns Hopkins just as Terrence was being wheeled into surgery. At 49, Powell was a veteran detective with 15 years in homicide and another 5 in violent crimes. His tall frame and broad shoulders gave him an imposing presence, tempered by intelligent eyes that missed little and a voice that could shift from intimidating to compassionate as the situation required. He'd seen countless horrors in his career. Baltimore wasn't known for gentle crimes, but even he was unprepared for the photographs the medical team had taken for their records. So you're telling me this man had normal sexual intercourse last night, and by this morning, his genitals were literally rotting off his body? Powell asked, his brow furrowed as he reviewed the medical chart in a small conference room adjacent to the emergency department. Dr. Wilkins, who had stayed to brief the detective while her colleagues took Terrence to surgery, nodded grimly. That's what makes this case so unusual, Detective. Tissue necrosis of this magnitude would typically take days to develop, not hours. And the presence of what appear to be California larvae, common blowflies, suggests deliberate introduction. These flies don't typically infest living tissue unless there's already significant necrosis present. Powell nodded, making notes in his small black notebook. I'll need to speak with him as soon as he's able. That may be a while, Wilkins warned. He's in surgery now, and we're fighting an uphill battle against both the infection and septic shock. The surgeons will debride the necrotic tissue, but given the location and extent of the infection. She paused, choosing her words carefully. There will likely be significant anatomical loss. Powell understood the implication. Any chance this could be self-inflicted? Or accidental? Wilkins shook her head firmly. Absolutely not. The pattern of infection, the presence of larvae at this stage of development, the targeted nature of the infection, this was deliberate and required specialized knowledge of both microbiology and pathology. Whoever did this knows what they're doing. While waiting for Terrence to emerge from surgery, Powell began his investigation. His first stop was the hospital security office, where he reviewed footage from the emergency room entrance. The recordings showed Terrence arriving at the emergency room alone, stumbling through the automatic doors shortly after 3:30 a.m., clearly in distress. He hadn't driven himself. The timestamp on the video showed a rideshare vehicle dropping him off at the entrance. Can you get me the information for that rideshare? Powell asked the security officer. Already working on it, the officer replied. Hospital protocol for potential criminal cases. We've requested the driver information and route data from the company. Powell's next step was to examine Terrence's personal effects. In the clear plastic property bag, he found a wallet containing identification confirming Terrence Johnson, 38, of Parkview Apartments, $63 in cash, a construction company ID badge for Baltimore Development Partners, and a smartphone in a battered protective case. The phone was unlocked. In his panic, Terrence hadn't bothered to secure it before heading to the hospital. Opening the device, Powell immediately located several dating apps. One of them, Hook Up Now, showed recent messages with someone named Allie. The conversation had started innocuously enough 3 days prior. Allie, thanks for the match. Not many guys swipe right on a girl my size. Terrence, their loss. I've always wanted to try a big girl. Bet you know how to have fun. Allie, oh, I definitely do. But fair warning, I'm not just big. I'm 500 pounds of woman. Still interested? Terrence, damn, that's a lot of woman. But yeah, I'm down. Always up for new experiences. Allie, that's what I like to hear. How about Wednesday night? I know a discreet place. The conversation continued with arrangements to meet at the Red Roof Inn off Interstate 95 the previous evening at 9 p.m. Allie had suggested she would bring drinks, to help you relax. Powell scrolled through Terrence's other messages, finding several crude conversations with friends about his upcoming encounter. Terrence to Mike, bro, I'm about to cross whale hunt off my bucket list tonight. This chick is huge. Like, 500 pounds huge. Mike to Terrence, damn, for real. You gonna need a crane to hit that. Face with tears of joy Terrence to Mike, gotta try everything once, right? I'll let you know if I survive. Might need oxygen lol. Similar messages appeared in group chats and to other contacts, all referring to the upcoming encounter as a novelty, an experience to brag about later. Powell's expression remained neutral as he read, but his jaw tightened slightly. The messages painted a picture of Terrence that wasn't particularly flattering, a man who viewed women as conquests and experiences rather than people. Powell dispatched officers to the Red Roof Inn while he coordinated with the forensics team to process Terrence's apartment. At the apartment, technicians collected samples from the sheets and bathroom, where they found an unusual residue along with trace evidence that would later be matched to the motel room. Meanwhile, at Johns Hopkins, Dr. Wilkins received preliminary lab results that deepened the mystery surrounding Terrence's condition. The cultures show Clostridium cadaverus, she explained to Powell when he returned to the hospital, spreading several lab reports on the conference room table. It's a bacterium typically found in the intestinal tract of human corpses after death. It's rarely, if ever, found in living patients, and certainly not in the concentrations we're seeing in Mr. Johnson. Cadaverous, Powell repeated. As in cadavers? Dead bodies? Exactly. This bacterium proliferates during putrefaction, the decomposition process after death. It's a key component in what we call the human decomposition microbiome. The strain we're seeing has been modified somehow. It's far more aggressive than anything documented in medical literature. Modified? You're saying someone engineered this bacteria? I'm saying this isn't natural, Wilkins clarified, pointing to a microscope image showing the bacterial cells. Look here, these morphological changes aren't seen in wild strains. This has been selectively cultured, possibly combined with other bacterial enzymes to increase virulence and tissue penetration. This is deliberate work by someone with microbiology training. And there's more, she continued, sliding another report across the table. We found traces of a powerful sedative in his bloodstream, flunitrazepam, commonly known as rohypnol. Enough to render him unconscious but not enough to be lethal. Powell's expression darkened. So someone drugged him, then deliberately infected him with bacteria from dead bodies. That would be my conclusion, yes. And the larvae, their first instar califority, indicating they were introduced as eggs approximately 8 to 12 hours ago, likely while he was sedated. The accelerated tissue necrosis created a perfect environment for rapid hatching. This isn't just attempted murder, Powell said quietly. This is torture. By the time Terrence emerged from the first of what would be many surgeries, Detective Powell had already begun piecing together a disturbing picture. The forensics team had found partial fingerprints in Terrence's apartment that didn't match the victim. Officers at the Red Roof Inn had secured security footage showing Terrence entering room 117 at 9:12 p.m. with a very large woman whose face was partially obscured by a wide-brimmed hat. The motel room itself had been cleaned, likely by housekeeping early that morning, but luminol testing revealed traces of bodily fluids on the bedsheets. Swabs from these areas were rushed to the lab for comparison with the samples taken from Terrence's apartment. Between surgeries, Terrence was briefly conscious enough for Powell to ask a few questions. The detective stood beside the hospital bed in the ICU, where Terrence lay connected to multiple machines monitoring his vital signs. His skin had a grayish tinge beneath its natural brown color, and surgical drains protruded from beneath the sheets covering his lower body. Mr. Johnson, I'm Detective Andre Powell with Baltimore PD, he said gently. I know you're in pain, but I need to ask you a few questions about what happened. Can you tell me about the woman you met last night? Terrence's voice was weak, his words slurred from pain medication. Alfreda, she said her name was Alfreda. Not Allie like on the app. Can you describe her? Big. Biggest woman I've ever seen. Dark skin. Pretty face, though. Hair in these little twists all over. Confident. He paused, grimacing in pain as he shifted slightly. She brought whiskey. Jack Daniels. I remember drinking it, then things get fuzzy. Did she drink too? No. Said she didn't like the taste. Just watched me drink. What's the last thing you remember clearly? Terrence's eyes filled with tears, spilling over onto his hollowed cheeks. We were having sex. I was on bottom. She was, so heavy. Could barely breathe. Then I started feeling strange. Dizzy. She leaned down and whispered something. What did she say? She said. Now you'll know what it feels like to be consumed. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Powell made a note, then continued. Did she say anything else? Anything about why she chose you specifically? Terrence shook his head weakly, then stopped as a thought seemed to surface. Wait, she asked me a question before we started. She asked if I'd ever been with a woman her size before. I told her no, that I'd always wanted to try a big woman. His voice broke. She got this look in her eyes when I said that. Like she'd confirmed something. Powell nodded, making another note. How did you get home after the motel? I don't really remember. It's all fuzzy. I remember being in an Uber. Feeling sick. Getting to my bathroom. Then seeing. He gestured weakly toward his lower body, unable to finish the sentence. One last question, Mr. Johnson. Did Alfreda seem familiar at all? Had you seen her before, maybe on other dating apps or around Baltimore? No. Never seen her before. Terrence's eyelids began to droop, the pain medication pulling him back toward unconsciousness. Why would she do this to me? Why me? Powell didn't have an answer yet, but as he left the ICU, he was beginning to form a theory. While Terrence fought for his life at Johns Hopkins, Detective Powell's investigation accelerated. The lab confirmed that the residue found on Terrence's sheets contained the same strain of Clostridium cadaverus found in his wounds, along with traces of blowfly eggs, deliberately planted while he was unconscious at the motel, then transferred to his apartment on his own body. As Powell delved deeper into Terrence's background, a clearer picture emerged of the victim. Terrence Johnson, 38 years old, worked as a construction foreman for Baltimore Development Partners. He'd held the position for 7 years, earning a reputation as a demanding but effective supervisor. Divorced 5 years earlier, he had developed a reputation among his co-workers for his womanizing and his tendency to brag about his sexual conquests. Terry always had a new story every Monday, said Marcus Washington, a coworker who agreed to speak with Powell at the construction company's office. A heavy-set man in his early 40s, Washington seemed uncomfortable discussing his colleague's private life but resigned to its relevance. Always chasing something new, you know? Different types, different sizes, different races. He'd joke about his collection, like he was checking women off some kind of list. Did he ever mention meeting larger women specifically? Powell asked, notebook open as they sat in the site trailer that served as an office. Washington nodded. Yeah, that was a recent thing. He called it his whale hunt. Sorry to be crude, but those were his words. Said he wanted to try everything once. Some of the guys egged him on, made bets about it. Bets? Yeah, like whether he'd actually go through with it. Terry would show pictures sometimes. The guys would rate them, joke about it. Washington looked down, embarrassed. I know it sounds bad. I didn't participate in that stuff. Another co-worker, Derek Thompson, provided similar information when Powell interviewed him separately. Terry treated women like achievements, not people, Thompson said, his expression serious. Especially bigger ladies. He'd show us pictures sometimes, without their knowledge. Send screenshots from dating apps. It was messed up. Did he ever mention anyone named Elfreda? Or Allie? Thompson shook his head. No specific names I can recall. But he did say he had a date with a supersized woman this week. Said it was the last type he needed to complete his collection. His words, not mine. Powell's search for similar cases yielded disturbing results. 18 months earlier, a man named Richard Collins had died from a mysterious infection that had initially presented in his genital region. The 42-year-old real estate agent had been admitted to Mercy Medical Center with symptoms similar to Terrence's, though the progression had been somewhat slower. The attending physician had noted the unusual nature of the infection but attributed it to a rare flesh-eating bacteria. The case had been investigated by Detective Sarah Martinez from the county sheriff's office. When Powell contacted Martinez, her response was immediate and concerned. They agreed to meet at the Baltimore Police Department that same afternoon. Martinez arrived promptly at 3 p.m., a trim woman in her mid-40s with short salt and pepper hair and the focused demeanor of a seasoned investigator. She carried a thick file folder under her arm, which she placed on the conference room table between them. I've been tracking similar cases for over a year, she revealed, opening the folder to reveal crime scene photos, medical reports, and handwritten notes. Richard Collins wasn't the only one. There was Jason Mercer in Annapolis 12 months ago, and Michael Torres in Silver Spring 8 months ago. All three men died from what was diagnosed as necrotizing fasciitis, but all three had unusual features that didn't fit the typical progression. All men? All the same age range? Powell asked, examining the photographs of the victims, all showing similar patterns of tissue destruction centered on the genital region. All middle-aged men, all known for their active dating lives according to friends and family, all matched with extremely overweight women on dating apps shortly before their symptoms appeared, Martinez confirmed. I've been trying to connect the dots, but the dating profiles disappeared each time, and we had no clear suspect description. The common thread was always a very large woman, but descriptions varied enough that I couldn't establish a definitive pattern. Until now, Powell said, sliding the security camera image from the motel across the desk. Martinez studied the grainy image, which showed a woman of extraordinary size entering room 117. Although the wide-brimmed hat obscured much of her face, enough was visible to provide a potential identification. This could be our first real lead. The timing fits the pattern too, 4 to 6 months between victims. But why is she accelerating now? If Terrence fits the pattern, she's moved up her timeline considerably. Martinez shrugged. Maybe something triggered her. Or maybe Terrence wasn't supposed to survive long enough to reach a hospital. The previous victims all died at home, they were found days later when neighbors reported the smell. Lab analysis of samples from all 4 cases confirmed they shared the same modified strain of Clostridium cadaverus, proof they were dealing with a serial killer who used sophisticated biological weapons against her victims. Powell interviewed Terrence's ex-wife, Monique Johnson, who provided further insight into his character. They met at her workplace, a real estate office in the Harbor East District, where she'd agreed to speak with him during her lunch break. Terrence always had issues with women, she explained, sitting stiffly across from Powell in a small conference room. At 36, Monique was an attractive woman with a professional demeanor and carefully controlled emotions. He cheated constantly throughout our marriage. When I confronted him, he'd say things like, "Men aren't built for monogamy," or "variety is the spice of life." He treated women like objects, especially after we divorced. Did he have a specific interest in larger women? Powell asked. Monique scoffed. Terence would sleep with anyone he saw as a conquest. He once told me that sleeping with a really big woman was on his bucket list, like it was some kind of exotic experience. It was all a game to him. Did he ever mention anyone named Alfreda? Or seeing someone unusually large? No, we don't talk much anymore. But I'm not surprised he ended up targeting someone like that. Terence always wanted what he hadn't tried yet. Always looking for a new experience to brag about. A review of Terence's medical records revealed a history of sexually transmitted infections, evidence of frequent unprotected encounters. His social media accounts showed a pattern of following and commenting on profiles of very large women, often with crude remarks or sexual innuendos that betrayed his view of them as novelties rather than people. The investigation gained momentum when the forensics team recovered GPS data from the dating app Terence had used. The data showed that Allie's account had been accessed multiple times from a residential address in West Baltimore, an apartment complex called Westview Gardens. Using the partial facial image from the motel security footage and the physical description provided by Terence, Powell ran a search through professional licensing databases for women who might match the profile and have medical knowledge. The search returned several possibilities, but one name stood out: Alfreda Brown, 42, a former pathology laboratory technician who had been fired from the University of Maryland Medical Center 3 years earlier for misconduct related to laboratory specimens. "We need everything on Alfreda Brown," Powell told his team during an emergency briefing. Employment records, social media, known associates, previous addresses, everything. What they found painted a disturbing portrait. Alfreda had worked in pathology labs for 15 years before being terminated for unauthorized use of laboratory equipment and materials. Her employment record showed she had specialized in microbiology and tissue sample processing, with particular expertise in decomposition studies. Her social media presence revealed a woman who had struggled with extreme obesity her entire life. Posts from her teenage years showed a bright, ambitious student interested in medicine, but also someone who endured relentless bullying. Her high school yearbook quote, "One day they'll all see me differently," took on an ominous significance in light of current events. More recent posts, made under pseudonyms that the cyber unit managed to link to her, revealed a growing fixation on revenge against men who fetishized her size. In one private blog, discovered through digital forensics, she had written, "They see me as an experience, not a person. A conquest. Something to try once and discard. They don't know what it's like to be consumed by others' perceptions, to be reduced to nothing but flesh. But I'll teach them. I'll show them exactly what it feels like to be consumed, literally, from the inside out." After her termination from the medical center, Alfreda had worked briefly at Eternal Peace Crematorium, a position that would have given her access to human remains and the bacteria that flourish during decomposition. A former co-worker from the crematorium, speaking on condition of anonymity, confirmed Powell's suspicions. Alfreda was always collecting samples. Said she was working on a personal research project about decomposition rates. Nobody questioned it because of her background in pathology. She had a small lab set up in her apartment, petri dishes, incubators, the works. I visited once, and it was like a mini laboratory in her spare bedroom. Did she ever mention any negative experiences with men? Dating problems? Anything like that? Powell asked. She didn't date much that I knew of. But she did talk about men who would message her online, saying they wanted to try a big girl or asking if it was true what they say about big women being more grateful for attention. It really bothered her, being treated like some kind of sexual curiosity. She'd get this look in her eyes when she talked about it, cold, you know? Like she was somewhere else in her head. Armed with this information, Powell obtained a search warrant for Alfreda's apartment at Westview Gardens. The tactical team arrived at 5:15 a.m., prepared for a high-risk entry given the suspect's access to biological weapons. But when they breached the door, they found the apartment empty. Alfreda was gone, likely fled after realizing Terence had survived and might identify her. What they did find, however, was damning. A spare bedroom had been converted into a rudimentary laboratory, complete with incubators, microscopes, and refrigeration units. Inside, they discovered cultures of various bacteria, including the modified Clostridium cadaverous strain found in all 4 victims. Most disturbing of all was a leather-bound journal containing detailed entries about each victim, their names, photographs taken surreptitiously, copies of their dating app conversations, and clinical notes about the progression of their infections. A page titled Subject 4, Terrence Johnson, contained a methodical timeline. 9:15 p.m., subject consumed approximately 6 ounces of Jack Daniel's whiskey containing 200 milligrams of dissolved flunitrazepam. 10:03 p.m., subject became disoriented, suggesting onset of sedative effects. 10:17 p.m., subject lost consciousness during sexual activity. 10:35 p.m., administered primary bacterial culture via 4 subcutaneous injections to perineal region. Introduced larval specimens to urethral opening and created ideal environment for proliferation. 11:22 p.m., administered stimulant to facilitate subject's partial consciousness and return home. Subject remained sufficiently impaired to have no clear memory of procedures. 3:17 a.m., estimated based on previous subjects, onset of acute symptoms likely occurred, forcing subject to seek medical attention. As Powell read the clinical entries, he felt a chill run down his spine. Alfreda had documented the previous victims' symptoms, deaths, and time frames in precise detail. Richard Collins had died after 48 hours. Jason Mercer had survived for 3 days before succumbing to septic shock. Michael Torres had lasted longest, nearly 5 days, before the infection reached his bloodstream and caused multiple organ failure. She's watching them die, Powell realized. She's studying them like lab experiments. The final pages of the journal contained a list of potential future targets, men who had contacted Alfreda through various dating apps, making crude comments about her size or expressing their desire to try a big girl. Next to each name were notes about their routines, workplaces, and vulnerabilities. Powell immediately issued a nationwide alert for Alfreda Brown, including her photograph and a warning about her dangerous medical knowledge. The cyber unit tracked her cell phone activity, which had gone dark immediately after her encounter with Terrence, but her credit card had been used at a gas station near Richmond, Virginia, suggesting she was heading south. Meanwhile, Terrence Johnson's condition remained critical. The surgical team had performed multiple debridements, removing dead tissue and attempting to halt the spread of the infection. Despite their efforts, the damage was catastrophic. After the 3rd surgery, Dr. Wilkins explained the situation to Powell. The bacteria was engineered to resist standard antibiotics, she explained during a case briefing with Powell and the Joint Task Force that now included FBI agents specializing in biological crimes. It appears to have been combined with enzymes that accelerate tissue breakdown, allowing the infection to spread much faster than would normally be possible. We've had to remove all of the external genitalia and significant surrounding tissue to stop the progression. And the larvae, an FBI agent asked. Deliberately introduced. The eggs were likely applied to already infected tissue, providing an ideal environment for hatching. It's sophisticated. Whoever did this has advanced knowledge of both microbiology and pathology. Could this be weaponized on a larger scale? Another agent asked. Dr. Wilkins shook her head. This was designed for intimate contact and targeted delivery. It's a personalized biological weapon, a method of torture rather than mass casualty. 3 days after Terrence was admitted to the hospital, the media caught wind of the story. Headlines about a dating app killer spread across the country, creating panic among online daters. Dating platforms rushed to issue warnings about meeting strangers, especially emphasizing the importance of public meeting places and informing friends about date locations. The cyber unit's breakthrough came when they identified a new dating profile created in Richmond that matched Alfreda's methodology. The profile for Destiny featured carefully angled photos of a very large woman, using filters and lighting techniques identical to those in Alfreda's previous profiles. Messages recovered from the account showed she had already arranged to meet a man named Keith Dawson at a motel outside Richmond the following evening. In their conversations, Dawson had made several comments about always wanting to try a big girl and asking if it was true that larger women were more grateful for male attention. "She's accelerating," Powell told Martinez as they drove to Virginia with a tactical team. The cooling-off period between her previous victims was months. Now she's hunting again after just days. The media attention might have triggered her, Martinez suggested. She knows we're onto her pattern. The task force coordinated with Virginia State Police to set up surveillance at the Bluebird Motel where Destiny had arranged to meet Keith Dawson. Female detective Lisa Chen posed as the front desk clerk, while tactical units positioned themselves in adjacent rooms. At 8:45 p.m., a rideshare dropped off a very large woman matching Alfreda's description at the entrance to the Bluebird Motel. The tactical team watched through surveillance cameras as she made her way to the office. She wore a flowing kaftan-style dress in a vibrant blue pattern that draped over her enormous frame, and a wide-brimmed hat that partially obscured her face, the same style of hat seen in the Red Roof in footage. She carried an oversized purse that likely contained her kit. Her movements were surprisingly graceful for someone of her size, showing no signs of the nervousness one might expect from a fugitive. She checked in under the name Destiny Williams, paid cash for the room, and received the key to room 115. The team observed as she entered the room, immediately pulled the curtains closed, and turned on the bathroom light. Through thermal imaging, they could see her moving around the room, placing items on various surfaces. Powell and Martinez watched from a command post set up in the motel's maintenance room, surrounded by monitors showing feeds from hidden cameras placed in the corridor. "She's setting up," Martinez observed. "Look at her movements, methodical, practiced. She's done this before." Powell nodded. "She's preparing her laboratory. We need to make sure we catch her with evidence in hand." He spoke into his radio, "All units hold positions. Let's wait for the target to arrive before we move in." At 9:10 p.m., Keith Dawson's silver Audi pulled into the motel parking lot. Dawson, a well-dressed man in his early 40s, checked his appearance in his rearview mirror before exiting the vehicle. He straightened his jacket, ran a hand through his thinning hair, and walked toward room 115 with the confident stride of a man anticipating a sexual encounter. Before he could reach the door, two plainclothes officers intercepted him, quietly identifying themselves and escorting him to safety. His confusion quickly turned to shock as they explained the situation. "You're saying she kills men? With bacteria?" Dawson stammered as they led him to a secure vehicle. "Jesus Christ, I just thought. I was just looking for something different, you know." At 9:15 p.m., Detective Chen, still posing as the front desk clerk, called room 115. "Miss Williams, this is the front desk. I'm so sorry to bother you, but there seems to be an issue with your payment. Could you come to the office?" There was a long pause before Alfreda responded, her voice surprisingly soft and melodic for a woman her size. "I paid cash. There shouldn't be any problem." "Yes, ma'am, but the system is showing an error. It will just take a minute to sort out." Another pause. "Can't it wait until morning? I'm expecting someone." "I'm afraid not, ma'am. It's hotel policy to resolve payment issues immediately. I'll need your signature on a new form." A heavy sigh came through the line. "Fine. I'll be right there." 2 minutes later, the door to room 115 opened. Alfreda stepped out, still wearing her hat but having changed into a different dress, a red one with a plunging neckline, clearly chosen for her date. She looked up and down the corridor, her expression wary, before closing the door behind her. She had taken 3 steps when Powell, Martinez, and 4 tactical officers emerged from their positions at both ends of the hallway. "Alfreda Brown, you're under arrest for the murders of Richard Collins, Jason Mercer, and Michael Torres, and the attempted murder of Terrence Johnson, Powell announced, his badge held high. For a moment, she stood perfectly still, her expression unreadable behind large framed glasses. Her eyes, intelligent and calculating, assessed the tactical team, the weapons pointed at her, and the distance to her room. Then, with surprising speed for someone her size, she attempted to slam back into her room. "She's running," Martinez called out, though running wasn't quite accurate for Alfreda's movement. She was moving with remarkable agility given her size, but the tactical team was faster. 2 officers reached the door before she could lock it, forcing their way in as Alfreda retreated toward the bathroom. Inside, they found her attempting to dispose of evidence in the bathroom sink, vials of cloudy liquid that would later be confirmed as containing the modified bacteria. "Stop! Police!" an officer shouted as Alfreda continued to empty vials down the drain. When she ignored the command, an officer tackled her, bringing her massive form down onto the bathroom floor with difficulty. Despite her size, which made conventional restraint techniques challenging, they managed to secure her hands behind her back with 2 pairs of handcuffs linked together. During her arrest, Alfreda remained eerily calm, almost detached, as if she had prepared herself for this possibility. The only time she showed emotion was when officers seized her purse, finding a medical kit containing syringes, vials, and specimen containers carefully organized in foam cutouts. "Those are my children," she said quietly, a tear sliding down her face. "My beautiful creations." The scene inside the motel room told the story of her methodology. The bed was covered with a plastic sheet, much like those used in medical settings. A small folding table near the window held a portable microscope, slides, and various chemicals. In the mini refrigerator, investigators found cultures in sealed containers, maintained at specific temperatures. Most disturbing was a new journal, nearly identical to the one found in her apartment, with detailed plans for Keith Dawson, including his photograph, personal information harvested from social media, and notes about his derogatory comments toward overweight women online. The page included a proposed timeline for the evening, ending with an estimated time of death 72 hours later. "You were too late for the others," Alfreda said as they led her out to the police vehicle, her voice matter-of-fact. "But I suppose 4 is a good sample size for preliminary research. Enough to establish a pattern." Back in Baltimore, Terrence Johnson began the long process of recovery. Beyond the physical trauma and permanent disfigurement, he faced severe psychological damage. The knowledge that he had been used as a human experiment, infected with bacteria harvested from corpses, left him with profound PTSD that would require years of therapy. "The nightmares are the worst," he told Powell during a follow-up interview 3 weeks after the attack. Terrence sat in his hospital bed, thinner now, his face gaunt from the ordeal. Multiple 4 lines still ran into his arms, delivering the powerful antibiotics needed to fight lingering infection. "I keep feeling her weight on me, hearing her whisper in my ear. And then I look down and see parts of me turning black, dying while I watch." Powell nodded sympathetically. "We're building a strong case against her, Mr. Johnson. She'll never hurt anyone else." "Why me?" Terrence asked, the question that had haunted him since that night. "Out of all the men out there, why did she choose me?" Powell hesitated, then decided Terrence deserved the truth. "You fit her victim profile. All her targets were men who approached her specifically because of her size, men who talked about trying a large woman, who treated the encounter as a novelty or an experience to check off a list." Terrence looked away, shame mixing with the anger and fear on his face. "So this happened because I was a jerk. This happened because Alfreda Brown is a murderer who created biological weapons to torture men she felt had objectified her," Powell corrected firmly. "Her actions are her responsibility alone, regardless of what prompted them." During her interrogation, Alfreda finally revealed the origins of her grotesque revenge method. She sat across from Powell and Martinez in an interrogation room at FBI headquarters in Quantico, where she had been transferred due to the biological nature of her crimes. Despite being handcuffed to the table, a measure necessitated by an earlier attempt to bite a guard, she maintained a composed, almost professional demeanor. "I worked with the dead for 15 years, she explained with unsettling professional detachment. "I watched how bodies break down, how nature reclaims what once was living tissue. It's actually quite beautiful, the perfect system for returning matter to the earth." "Why these men specifically?" Powell asked. "They wanted to consume me," she replied simply. "Men like them have been consuming women like me our entire lives. Using us. Treating us as experiences, fetishes, conquests. I just showed them what it actually feels like to be consumed from the inside out." "How did you select your victims?" Martinez asked. Alfreda adjusted her glasses with her cuffed hands. "They selected themselves. I created dating profiles that were honest about my size, 517 pounds at last measurement. I waited for men who responded with some version of, 'I've always wanted to try a big girl' or 'I've never been with someone your size before.' Men who saw me as an experience, not a person." "And then you murdered them," Powell stated flatly. "I educated them," Alfreda corrected, a hint of passion breaking through her clinical facade. "I showed them what it feels like to be nothing but flesh, to be consumed by another's desires and then discarded. The bacteria consume from within, just as their objectification consumed my humanity." "You tortured them," Martinez said. "Watched them die slowly." "I observed a natural process accelerated by scientific intervention," Alfreda countered. "No different from what happens to all bodies eventually. I simply targeted the parts they valued most, the parts they used to consume women like me." Forensic examination of Alfreda's journals and electronic devices ultimately linked her to 6 victims in total, including 2 previously undiscovered cases in Pennsylvania that matched her methodology. In each instance, she had used dating apps to identify men who specifically fetishized extremely overweight women, particularly those who expressed a desire to try such women as a novel experience. Her methodology had evolved over time, becoming more sophisticated with each killing. The first victim had taken nearly a week to die from the infection. By the time she targeted Terrence, she had refined her bacterial strain to cause visible necrosis within hours. "The first formulation was too slow," she explained during a subsequent interrogation session. "I wanted them to experience true consumption, to watch themselves being devoured while still conscious. The modified strain allowed for more rapid tissue penetration while still preserving neural pathways for maximum pain sensation." The evidence against Alfreda was overwhelming. Beyond her detailed journals, investigators found video recordings of her victims on encrypted hard drives in her apartment. The videos, taken surreptitiously, showed the men in various stages of infection, documenting their deterioration with clinical precision. She recorded them dying, Martinez told Powell as they reviewed the evidence. Set up hidden cameras in their homes during the initial encounter, then remotely accessed the feeds to watch the progression. It wasn't just murder, it was voyeurism. 5 months after Terrence's hospitalization, Alfreda Brown stood trial for multiple counts of murder, attempted murder, and biological terrorism. The courtroom fell silent as she entered, her 500-pound frame requiring a specially reinforced chair. She appeared almost serene, occasionally smiling slightly as the prosecution detailed her crimes. The evidence presented was damning. Forensic experts testified about the sophisticated nature of her biological weapon, how she had cultured and modified the Clostridium cadaverous bacteria to accelerate its flesh-destroying properties, and how she had synchronized the hatching of the blowfly larvae to maximize both physical damage and psychological terror. The defendant didn't just want to kill these men, the prosecutor explained to the jury. She wanted them to suffer, to experience the terror of watching their own bodies decay while still alive. This was calculated torture disguised as scientific experimentation. Terrence's testimony proved particularly powerful. Still visibly damaged both physically and emotionally, he described the horror of waking to find his body literally rotting while still alive. "I looked down and saw Saw myself being eaten alive, he testified, his voice breaking. Parts of me turning black, creatures moving inside my flesh. The pain was, beyond anything I can describe. But worse was knowing someone did this deliberately. That someone looked me in the eyes, was intimate with me, and the whole time was planning this torture. Alfreda watched his testimony impassively, occasionally making notes on a legal pad, her expression analytical rather than remorseful. When offered the opportunity to speak before sentencing, Alfreda rose slowly from her reinforced chair. Her voice was soft but clear as she addressed the court. For 30 years, I've been seen as nothing but flesh, too much flesh. Men like Terrence Johnson and the others saw me only as an experience to try, a story to tell their friends, a checkmark on their sexual bucket list. They consumed me emotionally, spiritually, treated me as less than human. I simply showed them what actual consumption feels like. I made the external match the internal, allowed their bodies to experience what they did to my soul. She looked directly at Terrence. Every man I chose had one thing in common, they all approached me with some version of, I've always wanted to try a big girl. As if I'm not a person, but a carnival ride. A novelty. An experience. Now they know what it feels like to be reduced to nothing but flesh. To be consumed. Turning to face the jury, she continued, her voice gaining strength. My methods were scientific, precise, and targeted. I never harmed anyone who didn't first reduce me to nothing but my size. I created justice in a world that offers none to women like me. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. The judge sentenced Alfreda to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, with additional provisions that she never be allowed access to any laboratory equipment or biological materials. Alfreda Brown, you have perverted scientific knowledge to create instruments of torture and death, the judge declared during sentencing. You have demonstrated a level of calculation and cruelty that this court finds profoundly disturbing. You will spend the remainder of your days in confinement, with no possibility of release. Alfreda received the sentence with the same detached calm she had shown throughout the trial, nodding slightly as if acknowledging the expected outcome of an experiment. In the aftermath of what the media dubbed the consumption killings, dating apps implemented new verification processes and safety features. A support group formed for survivors of dating violence, with Terrence eventually becoming a spokesperson despite his ongoing physical and psychological challenges. I made mistakes, Terrence admitted during an interview 6 months after the trial. I treated women as objects, as experiences. I'm not proud of that. But what happened to me, no one deserves that. No one deserves to watch themselves rot while still alive. The ripple effects of the case extended beyond dating safety. Medical schools incorporated ethics discussions about Alfreda's case, examining the responsibility that comes with specialized knowledge. Dating platforms developed algorithms to flag potentially predatory language and behavior patterns. The FBI established a new unit specifically focused on biological crimes facilitated through online platforms. Detective Powell, whose career had been forever changed by the case, often reflected on the darkness that could hide behind screens, the vulnerability inherent in intimate connections, and how quickly desire could turn deadly. The scariest part wasn't the bacteria or even the methodology, he told a class of new detectives during a training session. It was how easily she weaponized intimacy itself. The most vulnerable moment between two people became the delivery mechanism for torture. That changes how you look at human connection. 6 months after Alfreda's sentencing, a prison guard at the Maryland Correctional Institution for Women made a routine check of her cell. Alfreda was sitting calmly at her small desk, writing in a new journal that had been approved by prison authorities, supposedly for therapeutic purposes as recommended by the prison psychologist. When the guard passed, she instinctively glanced at the page. What she saw sent a chill through her body. The page contained a meticulously written list of names, prison staff, including doctors, nurses, and guards, with small notations beside each one. Next to the guard's own name was a single word, soon. The guard immediately reported what she'd seen, and Elfreda's cell was searched. The journal was confiscated, revealing pages of notes about the prison's medical facilities, staff routines, and access points to biological materials. One page detailed how common household items available to prisoners could be used to culture bacteria. Though no actual biological materials were found, Elfreda was placed in solitary confinement and denied access to the prison's general areas. Even in this restricted environment, she maintained her clinical detachment, telling a prison psychiatrist, "Consumption isn't just a physical process. Ideas can consume too. And ideas can spread faster than any bacteria." Despite additional security measures, prison staff reported unsettling interactions with Elfreda. She would observe them with analytical intensity, occasionally making comments about their physical health that proved disturbingly accurate, noticing medical conditions before they themselves were aware of symptoms. "She told me I should get my colon checked," one guard reported. 3 weeks later, my doctor found precancerous polyps. How could she know that just by looking at me? The damage Elfreda had inflicted extended beyond her direct victims. The surviving families of Richard Collins, Jason Mercer, and Michael Torres struggled with both grief and the horrific nature of their loved ones' deaths. Terrence Johnson faced years of reconstructive surgeries and psychological therapy, his dating life and intimate relationships permanently altered by both physical disfigurement and profound trust issues. In a world increasingly mediated by screens and algorithms, where strangers become intimate before becoming known, her case stands as a stark reminder of the vulnerabilities we expose when we invite others into our most private spaces, and how the human capacity for vengeance can transform sophisticated knowledge into weapons of intimate destruction. The story of Elfreda Brown and her victims became a cautionary tale told in hushed tones on dating apps and in bars, a modern urban legend that happened to be true. A reminder that behind every profile picture might lurk motivations and histories we cannot fathom, and that the most dangerous predators often recognize something of themselves in their prey. For Terrence Johnson, recovery meant confronting not only what was done to him, but what he had done to others. "I objectified women my entire adult life," he acknowledged during a support group session. "I never saw the damage that caused until I experienced the ultimate objectification myself, being reduced to nothing but flesh, a laboratory specimen. I'm not saying I deserved what happened, but I understand now what it means to be seen as less than human." Perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the case was how Elfreda's methods revealed the fragility of the human body, how quickly it could be turned against itself, how the same biological processes that sustain life could be redirected to consume it from within. It was a reminder that for all our technological advancements, we remain vulnerable in our most basic physical nature. In her final statement before being led away to serve her life sentence, Elfreda looked directly at the cameras broadcasting her trial and spoke words that would be debated by ethicists, psychologists, and criminologists for years to come. "I didn't create the consumption. I merely made it visible. Every day, people consume each other, emotionally, psychologically, spiritually. I simply showed what that looks like in physical form. Perhaps now, when you look at someone and see nothing but flesh, you'll remember what flesh becomes when it's nothing but flesh. We are all being consumed, one way or another. I just sped up the process. The truth behind closed doors can only come to light when we have the courage to share it. If this story moved you, help others discover it by sharing this video. Leave a like so others can see this story and gain awareness. And don't forget to subscribe to Guilty Whispers. Together, we can ensure that stories like Terrence's are never forgotten and that justice finds its voice.